2026, we're going to see more starting quarterbacks than any year in NFL history, and your fantasy season may just depend on it. What I've developed is called the quarterback drought theory, and I would love to explain my thoughts behind this. Starting off, I think we can look at the available quarterbacks. We're going to look at some of the quarterback needy teams. Then combined, we're going to create a couple of quarterback pairings. And then lastly, we're going to create some predictions. Starting off, let's take a look at the players. I've tiered these players out into 5 different tiers. And the first one I'm considering is the potential retirees. For that, we're going to start with Matthew Stafford. Stafford has been up in the air about retiring. He's on the older end of starting quarterbacks. But when asked about it, he's been said that if he's healthy at the end of the year, which so far he's remained so, and the Rams are interested in having him back, he said he would love to come back. And now I think there's still a chance he does retire, especially if the Rams go on to win the Super Bowl. But that being said, I think even if he does, there's a high chance he does choose to return. And so I ultimately think Stafford will likely be returning to the Rams next season. On the other end, we have Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers, even on the older end, and people have considered Rodgers relatively unlikely to remain on the Steelers next season. I think based on how the playoffs went and Tomlin's stepping down from head coach of the team, that definitely increased the odds that he will not be with the Steelers next year. The Steelers have mentioned that they are welcoming him back. But that being said, I think there's a very, very high chance that Rodgers does retire. Moving on, we take a look at the potential rookies. We're going to start with Fernando Mendoza. He seems to be the clear first overall pick, and I would tend to agree with that. Dante Moore recently was projected to be the second overall pick, but he was found out to have returned to Oregon, and that has changed up a lot of things in this NFL draft rookie class. And so instead of Dante Moore, we've been left with Ty Simpson from the University of Alabama, moving into our quarterback 2 slot for this 2026 draft class. Ty Simpson was offered a significant amount of money to stay in college. Schools like the University of Miami, even Alabama has mentioned they would potentially offer him back. But Ty Simpson said, despite that, he is going to go to the NFL, where he is likely a first-round pick. Other quarterbacks that we should monitor include Trinidad Chambliss out of Ole Miss. We have Carson Beck out of Miami and Georgia prior to that, Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU, and then John Mateer out of Oklahoma. Then we have some injuries. I feel like this year was a very unusual year. A lot of quarterbacks ended the year injured, and a lot of them have injuries that are going to linger potentially into the 2026 season. The first one would be Michael Penix. He, I believe, has a torn ACL and is projected to come back and start of the 2026 season, but is still up in the air. With that being said, Kirk Cousins does currently sit on this roster as a veteran backup presence. People predict that Kirk Cousins might not be on this roster next year. Cutting Kirk Cousins would save the team $35 million. So I predict that Kirk Cousins will be cut from the Falcons, and the Falcons might be looking for another veteran presence. Another quarterback who ended the season injured was Patrick Mahomes. He tore his ACL late into the season, and that is also concerning. He's a real trooper. He's probably going to push himself very aggressively to be ready for week 1. He might have a little bit of limitations on his week 1 availability. If he does come back, he might also miss the first couple of weeks or start on IR. We don't quite know. And then the last player to talk about here is going to be Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones also ended the season, I believe, with another ACL injury. Just brutal. His was a little bit earlier than Mahomes, and he's expected to be cleared for training camp and well in advance of the season. But again, we just don't know with setbacks that could happen. Those ranges can vary widely based on how they're doing in the offseason. The next is going to be the great unknown. This is a complete mess of quarterbacks that we have a lot of question marks about. Kyler Murray, for starters, seems to be moving on from the Cardinals after the season. He also ended the season injured, but should be definitely healthy starting for week 1 next year. Tua Tagovailoa, he ended the season benched. And again, we're going to have a new coach in Miami, and they might choose to keep him around. They might choose not to. You have Malik Willis, who's been backing up Jordan Love for the last 2 years on the Packers. He's shown a lot of promise in place of Jordan Love for his injuries. We have Tanner McKee, who's been backing up Hurts on the Eagles for a couple years now, and people have eyed him as a potential trade candidate. We have Justin Fields, who has been on a number of teams now. He played the season on the Jets, didn't look particularly great, and people have floated that the Jets ultimately might want to get rid of him, whether that be by trade or cut. You have J.J. McCarthy, who in his second season didn't look fantastic. Shedeur Sanders, who in his rookie season was kind of all over the place. We'll talk about that more later. You have Dylan Gabriel, also in the Browns, starting in his rookie season and looked pretty terrible. And then you have Anthony Richardson, who's been on the bench for quite some time now. Was actually projected to be the starter at the beginning of the season for the Colts, but ultimately didn't really see the field. Lastly, you have a couple of veterans we have to mention. You have Jacoby Brissett, who started a bunch of games for the Cardinals in place of Kyler Murray and looked pretty good in those starts. You have Geno Smith, who started the season for the Raiders, but ultimately did not look very good. You have Marcus Mariota, who started a bunch of games for the Commanders in Jane Daniels' absence. We have Joe Flacco, who moved around on teams and started for Joe Burrow when he was hurt. And then you have Russell Wilson, who initially started the season for the Giants, but ultimately got replaced later in the season. And so now let's take a look at the teams that are going to be looking for new quarterbacks next year, potentially. And I've categorized these in 5 tiers as well. You have the teams that have the oldies, so that is your Steelers with Aaron Rodgers, your Rams with Matthew Stafford. You're going to have the teams with top 2 picks, which are the Raiders and the Jets. You're going to have the teams who have their quarterbacks end of the season injured, and that is the Chiefs, the Falcons, and the Colts, to name a few. There was actually plenty more, but these are the 3 teams that have quarterbacks with potentially lasting injuries that might make them miss week 1. You have the teams that had former top 5 picks in the Dolphins and Tua Tagovailoa, and the Cardinals with Kyler Murray. And then lastly, you had these poorly performing youth talent on the Browns and the Vikings. So let's dive into what I predict will be the potential quarterback pairings in 2026. Now we're going to start in the tier 1 of high confidence. I'm going to tier these into high, medium, and low confidence levels in terms of how likely I think this is to be the starter for next year, and also how confident I feel in the quarterback that will come out of it. The first is the Raiders. I feel very, very confident to say that Fernando Mendoza will be their quarterback next year. People tend to agree that this is very, very likely. He is probably going to be the number 1 overall pick and the Heisman. And the bigger question remains is who will be backing up Mendoza? Mendoza, again, 41-6 touchdown interception ratio. He put up 9 yards per attempt under pressure, which was 4th best in college football. I think on the Raiders with this offensive line, that's incredibly important. I think the Raiders are going to need some veteran mentor behind him, but ultimately, Fernando Mendoza probably starts week 1. So my prediction for backup veteran is going to be Geno Smith. Now, Geno threw 17 interceptions in 2025 and has kind of an expensive contract. I don't think the Raiders want to retain him on his current contract, and so what they might do is have him adjust his contract on a team-friendly deal so that he maintains backup status. Otherwise, it's very likely that they might cut him or just move on from him entirely. And so I think that Geno's going to want to stay as the veteran presence on this team behind Fernando Mendoza, and we'll probably have to alter his contract accordingly. Next, moving on to the Rams, I feel fairly comfortable to say that Matthew Stafford will play next year as well. People think it's very likely he's going to win the MVP. And again, as mentioned before, unless the Rams ultimately win the Super Bowl, I think it is incredibly likely that Matthew Stafford will want to run it back with his Rams team, as they'll be very, very competitive for Super Bowl next year as well. So with that in mind, the Rams are going to be sitting at a point where they know they have maybe 1 to 2 more competitive years out of Matthew Stafford. I mean, he led this year in passing yards, passing touchdowns, put up 46 passing touchdowns, which second most, Jared Goff with 34. That's astounding. But they do want to develop someone behind him. And so what I've projected there is going to be John Mateer out of Oklahoma. I think there's a couple prospects in this draft class that kind of have a cap ceiling, but I think John Mateer has a lot of upside, and the Rams might choose to try and develop that for 1 to 2 years, given the opportunity. Mateer in 2024 in Washington State, I believe, he led the college football with 44 touchdowns. And then this year with Oklahoma, he had statement wins against Alabama, LSU, Tennessee, and a Heisman caliber performance against Michigan. And I think he's going to end up somewhere in the middle rounds. And I think Mateer, given the chance to grow behind Matthew Stafford, could become a real NFL prospect, and the Rams are going to take a shot on that. Next high confidence tier is going to be Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. As much as Mahomes did end the season injured, I do think he'll be ready in time for week 1 with limited setbacks. Mahomes did have a down year prior to his injury, but still was on a pretty great pace. He did rush quite a bit this year, which I am a little bit concerned about post-injury, how that'll look. With that in mind, I think the Chiefs are going to target a cheap veteran that they think can start 1 or 2 weeks if Mahomes does start the season injured or unable to play, or when you are injured, you're just more likely to get re-injured. So having a guy that they know can start games, potentially win on this Chiefs offense, is something that they might target. I think Marcus Mariota, similarly, a fairly mobile quarterback, and I think that they believe that Mariota can be this bridge quarterback to get them through some injury games if necessary. Next is the Falcons, another quarterback injury team. I think Penix will be ready for week 1. He completed about 8% of his big-time throws. That was listed as top 3 in the NFL, obviously prior to his injury. He had a huge average depth of target at 11.2 and a 102 passer rating, all really, really impressive things. And even after his injury, we saw Drake London, Kyle Pitts start to burst onto the scene. It gives a lot of confidence for these Falcons about what their offense could look like if everything kind of comes together all at the same time. That being said, I think they still need a cheaper veteran, both for the injury sake and also to help Penix in his development. And I think Russell Wilson could be a great pairing there. Russell is still fairly mobile-ish. He put up about 285 rushing yards this year, but his yards per attempt plummeted to 6.4. It's lowest in his career. I think the Falcons should be able to get him for cheap. And after moving on from Kirk Cousins, kind of look to fill that similar role, but just on a way cheaper contract. And now we're going to move into the medium confidence tier. The first team I want to talk about there is going to be the Colts. I project that Daniel Jones is likely to return. The Colts and Daniel Jones have both expressed interest in kind of returning after the season. Having put up a really good start to the season, I think both are going to want to run things back. Jones was 8-4 in his starts. He put up wins against the playoff Broncos and Chargers. He had a career high 68.4 completion rate, and he also rushed for 412 yards and 4 touchdowns, which is a part of his game that people continue to underrate. When you start the season a little bit injured, you are just more likely to get re-injured, and so the Colts are going to need a real backup this year, not Phillip Rivers or Riley Leonard. I think Justin Fields is going to be joining the Colts in 2026. Releasing Fields feels like the most likely outcome for these Jets. They could potentially trade him, but ultimately if they release him, it would prioritize dead money. And Justin Fields has stated that he would love to play backup for somewhere. He said specifically he wants to play for a team as a backup to a rushing quarterback. While the Colts feel confident in Daniel Jones, again, because of the injury and because he's not Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, they actually might be a better fit for the Justin Fields potential in free agency. Then, moving on, with the Minnesota Vikings with J.J. McCarthy. This will be J.J. McCarthy's third year, kind of effectively his second year, given that his first year was entirely injured. J.J. McCarthy put up 11-12 touchdown interception rate, 72.6 passer rating, pretty low completion percentage, and a pretty high sack rate, so not a lot of confidence there. He did have flashes this season, but overall didn't look particularly great in his starts on the Vikings. We've seen Justin Jefferson do fantastic, miraculous things with not great quarterback play, but even still, he struggled mightily in 2025. And I think Kevin O'Connell, when he looks at this team, he wants to build it around J.J. McCarthy, of course. If you can build it around a young quarterback, that is the best thing you could do in the NFL. But I think he wants to win games, whether it be with J.J. McCarthy or whether it be in spite of J.J. McCarthy. And so I think they're going to look for a really strong backup in the case that J.J. McCarthy either gets injured or just simply doesn't look the part. I think the Vikings are going to add a guy like Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett, obviously not the quarterback of the future for them. He was 1-11 with his starts on the Cardinals in 2025, but on the bright side, he had a 23-8 touchdown interception rate, and he made guys like Trey McBride and Michael Wilson look very visible and honestly elite in his performances. And so I think Kevin O'Connell sees that and thinks, if I can acquire him on a relatively cheaper deal, his 1-11 doesn't scare me because I think that you put that on the Vikings and we can win games with him. And so with that in mind, I think he's a strong backup presence on this team that will ultimately see the field a lot more than he should in 2026. Another team that I think is in a very weird spot is the Cleveland Browns. Shador has his lovers, he has his haters, and he's a lot in between. Ultimately, we can look at the stats. He put up 6.2 yards per attempt, which is not great, and 18.9 QBR, which is the 5th worst all time with 200 plus pass attempts since the stat has been recorded in 2006. And if you look at all the other quarterbacks who've put up similar numbers, it has not gone well for them. I think the Browns are going to look to add a different quarterback in the offseason, whether that be free agency or the draft, but there's just simply not going to be enough around. And ultimately, the new coach in the Cleveland Browns will end up backing Shador Sanders and then hope that if it doesn't work out, that all the pieces are there and you can just insert a quarterback to fix things. In the meantime, I think they're going to look for a cheap veteran presence to help in the development of Shador Sanders, but I think Deshaun Watson will be the veteran presence. We also have Dylan Gabriel there. He didn't look great in his 2025 debut. I do think the Browns will keep him around. He's on a cheap rookie deal. Might not see the field very much in 2026, but he will definitely still remain on this depth chart if I had to predict so. So again, we can take a look at the teams we talked about and the teams that we still have left. And as you'll notice, we have 4 teams remaining: Steelers, Jets, Dolphins, and Cardinals. And these are the teams I feel the lowest confidence in what can happen. We'll start with the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is all assuming that Aaron Rodgers retires, which I do believe will happen after the playoffs that we saw. And I believe that Kyler Murray is going to be the guy that the Steelers take a shot on. We saw the Steelers take a shot with Justin Fields just a few years ago, and they actually won a good amount of their games with him. I think he had a winning record on that team. they might think that they can win even more games around Kyler. I don't know how true that is, but it appears that the Steelers are going to be bringing in a young defensive coordinator as a head coach, so they might prioritize the defense and then take this shot. I think ultimately the Cardinals will trade him before cutting him. The Steelers can do that with a late round pick and a lot of like cash considerations. And so we can definitely see something like that happen in the offseason. Kyler ended the season 2-3, and then he got hurt. He had a 6-3 touchdown interception ratio, but had a very high sack rate, and people kind of behind the scenes had mentioned there was some leadership and other character concerns. It might not ultimately go super well, but I think the Steelers are going to give it a shot if they can't get their guy in the draft or get anyone else in free agency that they feel comfortable with. That being said, I do think the Steelers are going to still want to take a upside shot with their youth, and I think they're going to try in the draft to get a guy that they think could potentially start later this season or in 2027. And I think they're going to take a guy in the mid-round in Garrett Nussmeier. Nussmeier at LSU threw something like 3,900 passing yards, 34 touchdowns with a 4-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. He led the SEC in big-time throws with 28. Ultimately, LSU didn't do incredibly well this year, but a lot of that fell on their defense. And Nussmeier might be a guy that you can go get in the 3rd or 4th round that you feel like you can let sit and develop for some time. I think if Kyler doesn't play well, he might see the field more than he should in 2026. But nonetheless, I think the Steelers ultimately take a chance with him. Another player I want to mention here, while we have it, is Will Howard. Will Howard was a 6th-round pick in the 2025 draft. After his 2024 season, he ended the season with 12 rushing touchdowns, 35 passing touchdowns, 4,000 plus passing yards, 66.8 completion percentage. He still fell in the 6th round because a lot of people believe that he was more of a system quarterback and he succeeded just around the Ohio State team that was a national championship winning team. But nonetheless, he sits on this roster on his rookie deal and might see the field in 2026, even though he did not in 2025. The next team that I have low confidence, both percentage-wise and with the outcome of, is the New York Jets. I think ultimately the Jets, they're going to have a new head coach, and they're going to look at their division, and they're going to say, how are we going to beat Josh Allen and Drake May in the next 5 years, the next 10 years? And I don't think guys like Kyler Murray are the answer. I think the Jets are going to take more of an upside shot with Ty Simpson in the 1st round. The Jets have 2 first-round picks after the Sauce Gardner trade with the Colts. I think they'll stick around that pick 14 and take Ty Simpson there. Now, I am currently a student at the University of Alabama. I watched Ty Simpson play in every single home game. I watched all the away games. I've seen him develop as a backup quarterback for the past few years. And if you had to ask me personally, I don't think Ty Simpson is it. There's a lot of people, when you look up his traits and abilities online, people continually praise his NFL readiness, and I would actually disagree with that. I don't think he's ready for the big-time stage, and I certainly don't think he's ready for that with the New York Jets. He had about a 20% pressure to sack ratio, which is pretty bad. And again, behind this New York Jets line, I don't think that will go incredibly well. Ty Simpson, people also love that he is a mobile quarterback, but ultimately ended the season with about 1 yard per carry. People have praised his ability to process very quickly, but if you watched any Alabama games, they were calling most of their timeouts before the snap as they were struggling to get the plays off in time, and Ty Simpson seemed to have very little control over the offense there. But I do think the Jets are going to take the upside shot and see what they get with Ty Simpson in the 1st round. And the other thing I think the Jets are going to do is they're going to take a upside shot with I guess you can call him a veteran. He was drafted, I just believe, like 2 or 3 years ago, and he's been backing up Jalen Hurts every year since, with Tanner McKee. Tanner McKee has only seen the field for 1 NFL start. He looked good in the sense that he put up 270 yards and 2 touchdowns in a debut against the Giants in Week 18 in 2025. We really don't know from him. He's received a lot of positive news and positive rumors on the Eagles, and thus has made himself a trade candidate for the season. It's likely that he wouldn't need much to be traded for, but he's been paired with teams like the Jets as a potential target. And so I think the Jets look at this and they say, here's 2 guys that we don't really know much about, and we'll take shots with both of them in 2026. Ultimately, I think they end up starting Simpson, but I do think McKee will see the field as Simpson will struggle at his debut in the Jets. The Steelers getting Kyler Murray and the Jets making Ty Simpson makes a lot more sense to me, but can see these 2 quarterbacks going between these 2 teams in either combination. Now, we move on to the other low-confidence teams with the Miami Dolphins. Now, the Miami Dolphins are in an interesting spot. They are also going to need a new head coach with Mike McDaniel being fired, and they had Tua as their incumbent. And ultimately, I do think Tua will return. They'll try to get a different quarterback, but ultimately won't be able to really find a great replacement. Tua put up 15 interceptions this year, and despite his quicker release in the NFL, he's still at a very high sack rate. He's a significant injury history, and I can't imagine that this Miami Dolphins offense is going to be peaking in the same way it was 1 to 2 years ago. Now, the Miami Dolphins as a whole have mentioned they want to add real competition in 2026. I do think Tua is very, very likely to return to this team. They're looking to add real competition, and I think they're going to do that in the form of Carson Beck. He had 11 interceptions in 2025. People have kind of plagued him to be a system quarterback, but nonetheless, Miami might be able to take him in the mid-rounds. I've seen him be mocked somewhere in like the 3rd round and take a shot on him to potentially replace Tua if Tua doesn't perform well. Now, the other person that we definitely have to mention here is Quinn Ewers out of Texas. Ewers was a 7th-round pick in 2025. He had a disappointing end to his career at Texas, but Quinn Ewers started 3 games at the end of the season. He had a very good win against the Bucs, but ultimately ended with a 3-to-3 touchdown-interception ratio. He did show potential, probably not enough to start, but enough that he is worth mentioning and will probably see the field in 2026. Now, the last team is the Arizona Cardinals. I think the Cardinals in free agency are going to end up targeting Malik Willis. Malik Willis is a big question mark, but in 2024 and 2025, he started a couple games with the Packers. He put up about 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and that's over 150 attempts, so that's very, very considerable. And also 8.5 yards per carry, which is really great, shows that he's a mobile quarterback, and he's also had a very high passer rating in those games. That being said, he is a huge question mark, and I think the Cardinals also want a chance on a slightly younger quarterback. And every year in the NFL, we see quarterbacks who jump up the draft boards very, very close to the time of the NFL draft, whether that's a great pro day, a great combine, a great senior bowl. We see players shoot up the draft board every single year. And this year, I think that is going to be Trinidad Chambliss out of Ole Miss. Now, currently, Chambliss is fighting to get an extra year in college at Ole Miss. I believe he was denied in his first attempt. Now he's taking it to court. That stuff is well above my pay grade of knowledge. Ultimately, I have seen it largely predicted that he will go to the NFL draft, especially if people see him as the 3rd quarterback in this draft class. And ultimately, if teams fall in love with him, like I do predict they will, you can see him going in the early 2nd rounds. The Cardinals have a pick in the top 40 that I believe they'll use on Trinidad Chambliss, which gives him a real chance to start a lot of different games in 2026. So, with all of that being said, let's dive into 3 predictions I have as an outcome of all of this. Now, the first prediction and the title of this video is that there will be 70 plus starting quarterbacks in the NFL. There was one season an exception that I'm kind of ruling out as a big asterisk, was the 1987 strike season. There was just an absurd amount of quarterbacks that did start. But besides that season, the record that we've seen is in 2022, it was 69 starting quarterbacks. We've seen somewhere in the 60s or high 50s in the previous years, and I believe that we'll see 70 this year. Even if I'm going to argue that there's not a lot of great starting quarterbacks, I think that just emphasizes that there will be more quarterbacks who do see the field, right? So if there's less quality quarterbacks, there's just going to be more guys who are cycling in and out of teams. There's going to be teams who see injuries when you have these longer seasons, and we've already seen that quite a bit. You can take a look at these starting quarterbacks and judge for yourself. Even if you do believe in Shador, how do you feel about Tua? How did you feel about J.J. McCarthy this season? When I look at this screen, I feel good about these guys in the middle. I feel pretty good about Stafford. And honestly, I feel pretty good about Mendoza. But there's a lot of question marks elsewhere that I don't feel great about. Now, prediction number 2 is that just basic laws of supply and demand. I believe there will be plenty of reaches and plenty of overpays. I think Ty Simpson, again, probably going to be a top 16 pick in the NFL draft. I think Trinidad Chambliss is going to skyrocket himself to a top 40 pick, potentially even a first-round pick if the Cardinals want to move up, give themselves a 5th-year option with him. And again, people are projecting him to be a 3rd-round pick or later. People always rise up in draft stock right in front of the NFL draft, and I believe Chambliss is going to do that this year. So you're going to see these guys rise a ton in their value. And then also in free agency, I think Malik Willis is going to get paid. I think people have seen enough from him that they're going to give him a shot. And I also believe Jacoby Brissett is going to see himself a pretty big contract from the Minnesota Vikings. And then lastly, I talk about fantasy football on his channel, and I think the outcome I'm most disappointed for is going to be wide receivers on these teams. when you see a lot of rookie quarterbacks, the thing that always surprises people is how low their touchdown rate is. Every single year, you look at a rookie quarterback and you go, yeah, of course Cam Ward will put up 20 touchdowns in his rookie season. And oftentimes they just simply don't get there. There's a lot of rushing quarterbacks that I mentioned today. So that's your Malik Willis, that's your Kyler Murray. These guys just generally don't pan out very well with wide receivers. Not only are there lots of quarterbacks potentially starting the season hurt, but just a longer season and lots of other quarterbacks who have frequent injuries. And I'd be very worried for their teams and their options. And then you have a lot of these aging bridge quarterbacks, right? And so as much as Jacoby Brissett did have himself a good year, and Joe Flacco has been all right in his starts, you're going to see some of those guys fall off. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be all of them, but definitely some of them, right? These aging bridge quarterbacks, not very promising for these like younger, talented wide receivers on those respective teams. So ultimately, when you combine all that together, I think there's going to be a lot of poor wide receiver performance that we're going to see in the NFL. And I think that these quarterback teams that we've mentioned today, as well as a couple others, are going to be some that we definitely need to monitor going into this fantasy season. There's a lot that's going to happen in this 2026 season. There's a lot of potential consequences for your fantasy teams, and this quarterback drought is definitely coming. I believe there will be 70 starters in 2026. It's going to be a lot of very, very damaging fantasy wide receivers that we're going to see as a result of it. While the pieces might not end up in the exact spots that I predicted here today, I think the idea remains the same. If you think any of the predictions specifically are terrible or completely off, feel free to let me know in the comments. And there's lots more fantasy offseason content to come, so hope you stick around, and thank you for watching.